Welcome again to Wickerson Studios. This is Grasshopper for Rhino ABC, and I've laid it out pretty simply. One thing I've been meaning to show you is GrasshopperDocs.com is totally amazing. It'll run you through the main param math sets, um, vectors, curves, surfaces, meshes, transformations, displays, and intersections tools which come with Grasshopper. And then it will, after going over several hundred of those, it will get into the thousands, if not up to 10,000 plugin icons that can do incredible things off of food for Rhino. We'll start with params, which I've done, and I'll slowly move through that and then get into the maths, and I'll show you some examples of how to use these things. Uh, anyway, I just thought I'd show you that site. That's pretty amazing. And also, if I jump back over to here, we're not going to be spending time in the Rhino window, but I did mean to tell you before that Grasshopper is all you have to type in. You'll get lots of choices for it, but you can just type Grasshopper, hit enter, and it will load in Grasshopper. And it just takes a minute loading your plugins, and then you'll have your screen. For this demo, we're not going to look at anything within the viewport. It's not necessary for going into the second half of these primitives on params. So what I'm going to do is draw out my Grasshopper full. You can see that we get a full page. We've gone over and highlighted the ones that I use right here in blue. And we're slowly going to take all the nodes I've listed here, and I've kept it in kind of order: the ones I've used, the ones I've used less, the ones I haven't used at all. And we're going to go through each section, primitives, inputs, and utilities, and do this for every single icon as we go over what basically comes with Grasshopper. I wish it's something in a video I had when I started, but as you can see, we ran through. All I did on this last site, and the last thing I did was after selecting it all, you have a choice to preview on and off, but you can also enable and disable. So if I enabled, all of a sudden we'd make sure you can see that all data is working here and everything's being funneled through the points, the curves. Keep in mind that I internalized every bit of data last time, so I don't depend on what's in the Rhino window, and I can extract those back into and bake those back into Rhino whenever necessary. So when I'm done doing things, I'm going to turn it blue because blue makes me feel really good. I'm going to disable that. Now we're going to take a look at what was in the primitives. And what I had there was this list of all of them. They're all named because of the bifocals tool, which is a plugin that I bring in from Food for Rhino. I can leave it on icon, I can leave fancy wires, and I can leave show. There's no examples of it yet, I don't believe. Yeah, here it is, showing showing names. So you get the icon, you get the names instead of just a letter to indicate that. A lot of information, but what I've done is taken the ones down the side, and I'll show you how they're in use. Even though there's other ones like complex numbers, I'm not using that since I was in grade, going to school in math. Matrices I haven't used. I've had no need to go into that yet. I think I'll probably get there sooner or later. Data paths I've used, data I've put in. I've used the robotic, parametric robotic controls of KUKA Robotics as well, but now I just use robotics. But I'm going to show you the ones that were on the far right in this section, which came out of primitives. So I cut and paste them by just selecting them, and I selected exactly those ones. Whatever one you touch on when you scroll up from the bottom will be whatever touches on the nodes, and as you come down from the top, it will only select what's fully encompassed. I meant to say that earlier. Okay, so I've cut and pasted those, and I brought them over here. So let's take a look at which ones we have. Bring my beautiful face up here again for you. And I think you like my param shirt, so I'll try and change my shirt so you know which section I'm in. I'll cover params. I'll change my shirt for maths. Anyway, here it is. What I have gone in is I snuck down to input, and I've grabbed the panel tool, which I told you about. And what's nice is you can pull up a panel tool, and you can input anything you want into it. And after doing that and leaving it, you're going to have to go back in and right-click and hit multi-line data. And relieve that, otherwise it won't be listed. Put it in as a list. So I've done that for each one of these. I've gone into here, I've typed in data, I've left it, and then I've gone back and hit the multi-line data on. That's what it looked like when I typed it in, right? And in leaving, right click, hit multi-line data, boom. And you can see it conversions, the Boolean, because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at these primitives you can bring in as containers. Anything with a hexagon around it is a container, not a component. So literally, putting this in, this is what's coming out when you take it out. Obviously, it changes a little bit and moves ones and zeros to trues and false. It's a Boolean container. Now you've got an integer container, so you can type in these numbers. I didn't really check it, but what happens if I do put in a float number with a decimalized place and put it through? You'll see that it still converts it over to an integer. So that's an interesting tool. Number tool, I put in floats. I actually put in pi, and you end up getting out pi because it won't bother trying to round that. It'll leave it as it is to use for further uh, depending on how you're using it within your trig functions and things like that. Text file is pretty good. You can type anything you want, and boom, it comes up. And text is when you actually get into coding. If you've done any my Hello World type programming in Python or C++ or anything you think you're going to want to probably deal in characters and deal in text. I don't use much of it for my geometry, but it is important to get to know if you're trying to use some logic when it comes out of the maths. Color swatch is pretty cool because if you just bring in a color swatch tool, which is once again under input, and I didn't want to get ahead of myself, I'm using that to input into the container color, and then you can see what comes out in an RGB number system of what's actually on there and how you get that powerful color. I've actually had to go into the maths also a little bit ahead and go into domains so I can look into making domains 2D and you'll see exactly what happens. As I make one, it defaults over here, and you can see it defaults to 0 and 1, and it sets up a domain from 0 to 1. Nice container to find out what's there, and then you can take it apart using the other tools we'll get to in maths. Then I constructed domain 2, and this was a domain 2 container. And the same thing, it just, instead of just doing a single domain, which would be t on a curve, say, from the beginning to the end, if it's been re-parameterized, we'll talk about that later, you can see that we've got a UV from 0 to 1 as well, indicating iso curves on top of a surface. One thing I've had to do here is I have a global unique identifier. I use it quite often. Every single thing the computer locates and knows what it is. I've taken from Carl Singline his script on GH Python. We'll get into that when we get into maths as well, but I've grabbed an object. So basically I grabbed a circle. If I went into curves and grabbed, well, you grab absolutely anything, but if I grabbed a rectangle and I inputted that into Y, you'd see the global identifier changes because these things have to be identified by the computer and know where they're going. So I'm going to leave it on the circle, put it into X or Y, and you get your global identifier. And that can come in handy, but anything you have, there's a tool, Control Shift, and it opens up whatever, all the information on here, and you can dig out your global identifier. But like I said, Carl Singline wrote a really nice Python script, which we'll get into later. Very simple script right here. And I've got there it is. You can write it yourself into your Python nodes. I keep it on my file just for note in my snippets bar because I use it so often. So I can go in here and grab my GUID component, pull it up again. And that's, instead of having to write that whole script or write some code for it, it's right there for me to use. So that's a little more advanced than what we need to talk about right now. The other thing I noticed was the CPath. I could go in here and I could click and I could grab an existing file and bring it in. But if it's a picture file, I thought this was pretty interesting. You can actually go into your image sampler, right-click, double-click on your image sampler, or at least I thought you could. It's just, yeah, and you can bring in any file you want, bring it in any color you want. And then all you have to do to make that work is you plug it in, and it doesn't seem to work like it's inputting that data in there. It doesn't say it's in there into the file because it needs it in there. And I found out if you just hit disconnect by control and then do the opposite of connecting your wires, boom, you're right back, and now you have a piece of data in there, a file that's actually tucked into that file path you can use for later. So that's it. We're at 8 minutes. I've shown what to go through on params. We've gotten through primitives. What I'm going to do is say I'm pretty happy with those as a basic example. Turn it to that group. Turn it to a beautiful color blue, which makes me feel pleasant. It doesn't matter if it matches exactly. And there we go. We're now going to go into inputs. And you can see over here I have a tool that's the snippet. It's just a weird kind of, it stays up there whenever you use your snippet tools. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into inputs. I'm going to choose the ones that I use often in here, and they're absolutely here for the next one. Certainly number slider is one of the most used components along with panel, Boolean toggles, buttons. I don't really use the other stuff, but I know what it is. Don't use my calendars, color wheels, swatch colors. There's color swatch on there, and then there's gradient colors, which you can go into. We'll talk about that in detail, and then how to use a graph mapper and apply it, how to use that image sampler I just showed, and actually a protein database and reading files. So we'll probably, actually I'll probably not do that one, so I'll just put it in the middle of something I've used, but I'm not going to cover. That's it. Thanks for watching.